Are you sure about this? Sophie muttered to herself as she stepped off the curb, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn leather bag tighter than necessary. The rain had started again, light at first, then growing into steady drops that splashed against the concrete of the quiet side street in downtown Chicago. She took a deep breath, her reflection in the glass of the towering office building across the street showing the tired lines on her face, the frayed hem of her skirt, the scuffed heels that had seen better days. She had promised her mother she would handle this, that she would make the impossible seem ordinary, and somehow, just somehow, survive this meeting that could either save her tiny art gallery or crush her entire world. Pushing open the glass door, the warm scent of polished wood and coffee enveloped her, the soft hum of conversation and quiet clinking of cups creating a gentle rhythm that seemed almost soothing, almost. But the pit in her stomach refused to ease. She scanned the room quickly, her eyes darting over the sleek tables and high-backed chairs, trying to find the man she was supposed to meet. And then she saw him. Ethan Cole, taller than she expected, perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair slightly tousled in that effortless way that made it clear he belonged to a world she could barely imagine. She swallowed, forcing herself to straighten her shoulders, forcing her hands to stop fidgeting. This was not a date, not in any sense that mattered. This was business, a contract, an agreement that could either be her salvation or a trap she couldn't afford. She walked toward the table, the heels clicking lightly on the hardwood, and her throat tightened as she reached him. "Mr. Cole," she asked, voice just above a whisper, betraying the tension she tried to hide. He looked up from his phone, and for a moment, his dark eyes held an unreadable flicker, almost amusement, almost surprise. "Sophie Taylor," he said evenly, standing just enough to nod in acknowledgement. "Please have a seat." She hesitated, glancing down at her bag as if it might suddenly sprout wings and escape for her. Sliding into the chair opposite him, she fought the urge to fidget, smoothing her skirt and straightening her bag on her lap. His expression was polite, controlled, yet there was an undeniable weight in the air, a gravity that made her aware of every inch of space between them. "I understand this is unconventional," Ethan began, his tone calm, measured, each word deliberate. "But circumstances require a formal arrangement. I need someone to enter into a marriage contract, temporary, controlled, with clear terms, and you are the most suitable candidate I can approach." Sophie blinked, the words landing with a mix of incredulity and a strange flutter she couldn't name. This was not what she had expected. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the worn heels, the budgeted groceries, the late nights at the gallery with the sharp suits, the penthouse floors, the quiet hum of his world. I don't know if I can," she started, but Ethan raised a hand, calm, patient. "I understand it seems sudden, impossible even. But I assure you, there is structure, boundaries, and protections. You will not lose yourself, your work, or your independence. And this is precisely why I asked you, Sophie. Your integrity, your resilience, your perspective. I need someone who can navigate this world with clarity, not fear." Sophie's heart pounded, every instinct screaming that this was madness. Yet there was a magnetic pull in his confidence, a strange comfort in the certainty he radiated, as though entering this agreement might just be the lifeline she had been grasping for in a city that often felt cold and indifferent. The hum of the cafe around them, the warmth of the freshly poured coffee, the faint smell of vanilla and cinnamon, all of it blurred as she weighed the impossibility before her. This was not love, not yet. This was survival, strategy, and perhaps an unexpected encounter that would alter the trajectory of her life in ways she could not yet fathom. And still, despite the fear, despite the absurdity, a part of her wondered if she could trust him, if she could step into this world where every move was measured, every decision scrutinized, and perhaps, just perhaps, find something real amidst the contracts and expectations. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Sophie Taylor's tiny apartment, catching the dust motes dancing in the narrow beam that stretched across her worn hardwood floors. She stood by the kitchenette, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since cooled, staring at the stack of unpaid bills that seemed to mock her every attempt at planning. Her gallery rent, utilities, and the few remaining art supplies pressed down on her mind like the weight of the city itself. She had always dreamed of her own space, a place where colors and canvases could breathe, but the reality of Chicago rent and the thin margins of a struggling gallery kept her grounded in a life of compromise. Her phone buzzed gently, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Ethan Cole appeared, succinct, professional, and yet carrying a weight she could not ignore. Meet me at the office at 2. All documents ready. She hesitated, tracing the edge of the chipped mug with her thumb, the tremor in her hand betraying the mix of excitement and anxiety. Could she really step back into the world of tailored suits and polished marble floors? Could she navigate a space where every movement and word might be scrutinized, evaluated, and judged? She had said yes, reluctantly, pragmatically, and yet a part of her felt a flutter of curiosity that she had not felt in years, a spark of possibility that perhaps this arrangement could open doors she had only dreamed of. By the time she locked her door and stepped into the bustling streets, the rhythm of the city seemed to pulse in tandem with her heartbeat. Cars honked in the distance, pedestrians passed with umbrellas shielding them from the sporadic drizzle, and the aroma of roasted coffee from the corner cafe mingled with the scent of wet asphalt. Sophie adjusted the strap of her bag and reminded herself to breathe, to keep her focus, to treat this as a business engagement first and foremost. Crossing the street, she caught sight of the sleek black car waiting at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the gray sky above. Ethan stepped out, crisp suit, calm demeanor, but his eyes held a flicker of something unexpected, perhaps anticipation, perhaps calculation. "Ready?" he asked, voice low but steady, offering a hand to guide her to the car. Sophie nodded, allowing herself a fraction of trust as she placed her hand lightly in his, the warmth of his palm reassuring despite the unfamiliarity of the world she was stepping into. Inside the vehicle, the soft hum of the engine was the only sound, the leather seats cool beneath her fingers. Ethan reached over, sliding a folder toward her. "These are the preliminary terms," he said. "Nothing you cannot refuse, nothing that compromises your independence, but every action and responsibility we will take on is documented here." Sophie opened it carefully, the crisp paper almost daunting in its perfection, the black ink sharp against the white pages. Her eyes scanned the clauses, noting the clear boundaries, the limits, the protections promised, and yet the responsibility she was being asked to assume made her pulse quicken. This was not a simple task, not a casual agreement. This was a partnership of circumstance, a bridge between two worlds she had never imagined crossing. She looked up at Ethan, his gaze calm, unwavering, and for a brief moment, the noise of the city outside faded, leaving only the quiet tension of the car and the possibilities that awaited. Could she truly navigate this new reality, honor her commitments, and yet preserve her sense of self? The answer seemed uncertain, yet the very act of stepping into the car, of taking the folder, of meeting him halfway, was a declaration of courage she had not realized she still possessed. And as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, the streets of Chicago stretching endlessly ahead, Sophie felt the first ripple of change, the subtle stirring that this improbable agreement might just be the beginning of a life she had longed to create. The car slowed as it approached the towering glass facade of Ethan Cole's office building, the sun reflecting off the windows in sharp, golden streaks that danced across the pavement. Sophie felt her pulse quicken as she stepped out, adjusting the strap of her bag and smoothing the front of her skirt, the polished black shoes still scuffed at the edges from months of daily wear. Ethan walked beside her, calm and assured, his hand occasionally brushing against hers as they navigated the revolving doors into the marble-floored lobby. The scent of polished stone and fresh flowers filled the air, a subtle reminder that she had entered a world far removed from the narrow streets and modest apartments she was used to. A receptionist smiled politely, directing them toward the private conference room where the first set of documents awaited review. Sophie followed silently, her mind a flurry of calculations, both practical and emotional. She had to balance her own dreams, the gallery that needed care, the promises she had made to herself, and now the weight of this formal arrangement pressed upon her like the gravity of the building itself. Inside the room, Ethan laid out a sleek black folder, the gold lettering catching the light as he opened it carefully, revealing the detailed clauses, responsibilities, and protections that formed the framework of their agreement. Sophie took a deep breath, scanning each line, noting the clear boundaries, the responsibilities assigned to each party, and the safeguards that ensured her independence would remain intact. She felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension, comforted that her autonomy would be respected, yet aware of the magnitude of commitment she was being asked to assume. Ethan watched her closely, his dark eyes softening slightly, just enough to hint at trust and patience, giving her space to process without pressure. As she closed the folder, her fingers lingering over the edge, Ethan spoke again, low and measured, explaining how they would navigate public appearances, social functions, and the careful choreography of interactions that would maintain discretion and propriety. Sophie listened intently, nodding, absorbing the details, the rhythm of his instructions oddly calming, a structured promise in a world that had often felt unpredictable. The hours passed quickly as they discussed schedules, expectations, and small practicalities, each conversation revealing a glimpse of Ethan's meticulous nature, his consideration, and the subtle warmth hidden beneath the polished exterior. By the time they concluded, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the marble floors, and Sophie realized that despite the anxiety she had carried from her apartment, she felt a growing sense of capability, a confidence born of preparation and clarity. Ethan offered a faint smile as they walked back toward the car, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken partnership forming between them. Sophie exhaled softly, feeling a tentative sense of optimism, knowing that stepping into this structured arrangement was the first step toward navigating a world she had long admired from the outside, and perhaps discovering strengths she had not realized she possessed. The following days settled into a rhythm that was both strange and strangely comforting for Sophie Taylor. Each morning, she rose early, the first light spilling through the thin curtains of her apartment, brushing across canvases stacked against the walls, half-finished sketches awaiting her attention. Her gallery, modest as it was, seemed smaller when weighed against the towering windows and polished floors of Ethan Cole's world, yet she carried the determination to honor both spaces with equal care. She learned quickly to navigate the nuances of the corporate schedule, the careful timing of meetings, the subtleties of conversation that hinted at alliances and expectations. Ethan, observing her from across the polished table in his corner office, noted how she adapted with grace, her eyes bright with curiosity and resolve, her hands precise and purposeful, even when the instructions were unfamiliar or challenging. Their interactions were punctuated by small, quiet moments that revealed more than words could convey. A shared glance across a crowded room, a brief exchange about the coffee in the break area, a gentle reminder to pause and breathe during the flood of paperwork. Sophie began to notice details in Ethan that contrasted with his reputation. The way he lingered at the gallery window to admire a new painting, the subtle way he ensured staff were acknowledged, the rare, fleeting smile that softened the stern lines of his face. She found herself anticipating these moments, a curious blend of professional diligence and personal interest weaving together in the silent spaces between obligations. Ethan, in turn, found his attention drawn repeatedly to her reactions, the thoughtful furrow of her brow as she considered a challenge, the honest delight when a project exceeded her expectations. Their bond grew not through declarations, but through a shared understanding of responsibility, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence in spaces both public and private. The days blurred, measured by the shifting shadows on the office walls and the passing hours of meticulous planning and careful execution, yet a pattern emerged. Sophie's confidence increased, her voice carried more authority during discussions, her decisions became decisive, and Ethan's guidance shifted from instruction to collaboration. Evenings often found them lingering in the quiet of the penthouse office, reviewing schedules, discussing the subtle interplay of public perception and private intention, sharing stories of childhood memories and small triumphs, moments of levity that punctuated the otherwise formal arrangement. Each day added a layer of understanding. Each shared project and problem solved together built an unspoken trust. Sophie began to see the person behind the reputation, the humanity beneath the carefully constructed exterior, while Ethan, observing her commitment, compassion, and intelligence, realized that her presence was more than convenience. It was a steadying force, a perspective he had not anticipated needing, yet could not now imagine being without. And in the quiet moments, when the city outside was bathed in the amber glow of sunset and the office hummed with subdued activity, they shared brief smiles and lingering eye contact that carried more meaning than any spoken word, signaling the delicate yet undeniable bond that was quietly forming between them, a bridge between two worlds that once seemed impossibly distant. The evening air carried a gentle chill as Sophie Taylor stepped onto the terrace of Ethan Cole's penthouse, the city lights glittering below like a sea of stars captured in glass and steel. She wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders, her hands brushing over the worn leather straps of her bag as she glanced back toward the office door, still glowing softly with the remnants of the day. Ethan appeared beside her, the faint hum of the elevator fading behind him, his presence steady and reassuring in the quiet expanse of the terrace. "I thought you would have left by now," he said, a hint of warmth in his voice that made her turn toward him, surprised. Sophie offered a small smile, the tension of the day easing slightly as she realized the world outside these walls could wait for a few more moments. They stood side by side, looking out over the skyline, the streets below bustling with traffic and life, a stark contrast to the calm isolation of the terrace. Ethan broke the silence. "You handled the presentation well today. I could see the room responding to your insight, your confidence. It was impressive." Sophie felt a flush of pride mingled with disbelief, a quiet acknowledgement of her own growth since stepping into this unfamiliar world. "I did my best," she murmured, her voice low, careful, as though the words themselves were a fragile thing she had to protect. Ethan turned slightly, studying her expression, the soft glow of the city reflecting in his eyes. "Your best is more than enough," he said, the sincerity in his tone cutting through the usual formality she had come to expect in such spaces. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, the kind that required no words, only the recognition of shared effort and mutual respect. As the minutes passed, Sophie felt herself noticing more of Ethan, beyond the polished exterior and calculated confidence. The way he adjusted, his tie with subtle care, the slight arch of his brow when observing the city below, the soft sigh he emitted as he watched a distant car make its way through the wet streets. Each gesture was small, yet it added depth to the man she had thought she understood only in fragments. "Do you ever just walk these streets without meetings or obligations?" she asked softly, curiosity threading her words. Ethan chuckled quietly, a sound that seemed to resonate with the openness he rarely allowed others to see. "Sometimes," he replied, "eyes still on the horizon, but it is rare. The city moves fast, and I often feel I am racing alongside it rather than within it." Sophie nodded, understanding more than she expected, the invisible weight of their worlds momentarily lightened by shared perspective. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of distant rain and warm streetlights, and for the first time, Sophie felt the space between them less defined by contract and expectation, more by connection and trust quietly building. She glanced at Ethan, and he met her gaze, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them, a hint of the possibility that what began as an arrangement could quietly, inevitably, become something much deeper, grounded not in obligation but in the subtle, unfolding intimacy of understanding and shared experience. The weekend arrived with a quiet promise, the kind that seemed to settle over Chicago like a soft blanket, diffusing the usual rush of honking cars and hurried footsteps. Sophie Taylor awoke to the pale light filtering through her apartment window, the sheets still warm from sleep, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of gallery concerns, schedules, and the meticulous obligations that came with her temporary arrangement, felt lighter, if only slightly. A text buzzed softly on her phone, not from a client, not a gallery inquiry, but from Ethan Cole. "Meet me at the rooftop garden at 4. No explanation, no preamble. Sophie paused, the flutter of anticipation catching in her chest. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple blouse and skirt that felt comfortable yet presentable, slipping on the shoes that had become her daily armor. When she arrived, The elevator doors opened to reveal the expanse of the penthouse rooftop, the city stretching endlessly in every direction, bathed in the golden glow. Of late afternoon, Ethan was already there, his dark suit replaced with a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly, a softness she had rarely seen. He gestured toward a small seating area overlooking the skyline, the breeze teasing strands of her hair as she approached. "I thought it would be peaceful up here," he said, his voice carrying just enough warmth to draw her attention fully. Sophie nodded, letting the moment settle around them, the hum of the city below fading into the background. They spoke quietly at first, discussing minor details of the arrangement, small adjustments to upcoming schedules, the sort of conversation that might seem ordinary but, in this space, felt intimate. And then, almost imperceptibly, the tone shifted. Ethan spoke of things he rarely shared, stories from his childhood, his parents' expectations, the pressures of wealth and responsibility that had shaped his careful demeanor. Sophie listened intently, each revelation a crack in the polished armor he wore so consistently, and she felt a new kind of connection forming, one built not on contract or obligation, but on understanding and empathy. She shared her own experiences, moments of struggle and small triumphs in keeping her gallery alive, the late nights, the endless calculations of what could and could not be done. Ethan listened without interruption, nodding, asking questions that showed more than casual interest, reflecting a genuine desire to understand her world. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows and painting the city in shades of amber and rose, a subtle shift occurred in the air between them. Words were no longer needed to convey the growing trust, the quiet acknowledgement that this arrangement, initially a necessity, was becoming a space where two individuals could see each other fully. A gentle silence stretched, punctuated by soft laughter over a minor anecdote, the occasional murmur of wind, the faraway sound of traffic, and in that shared quiet, Sophie felt a spark of clarity. The bond forming here was unexpected, delicate, and entirely real. Ethan glanced at her, and for the first time, he let his expression soften completely, eyes warm, attentive, unguarded. She realized that despite the contract, the formalities, and the world that separated them, there was a possibility for something genuine, a connection that neither papers nor schedules could define. And in that golden hour, high above the bustling city, they both understood that trust and vulnerability could emerge even in the most unlikely of circumstances, setting the stage for the changes that were quietly, inevitably unfolding between them. The tension had been building all week, subtle yet unmistakable, like the low hum of a violin before a crescendo. Sophie Taylor stood just outside the gallery entrance, her fingers clutching the straps of her bag tightly, the city noises fading into a background blur as she processed the text she had just read. It was from a colleague she trusted, a warning that someone had questioned Ethan Cole's motives, suggesting that she might be more of a pawn than a partner, that the arrangement was never meant to allow her genuine input or growth. Her chest tightened, the exhilaration she had felt on the rooftop moments ago replaced by doubt and unease. How could she have misread everything? The dinners, the collaborative meetings, the moments of quiet understanding on the terrace. They had felt real, meaningful, authentic. But now a shadow of suspicion crept in, whispering that perhaps she had been naive, that the warmth and attention were calculated, a performance designed to maintain control over the situation rather than nurture a connection. Sophie's steps slowed as she approached the gallery door, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe in the trust that had been building, in the glimpses of character she had seen in Ethan beyond the polished exterior, yet the words she had read clawed at her certainty. Inside, the space that had once felt like her safe haven now seemed alien, the canvases suddenly cold and distant, the frames catching the light in sharp angles that emphasized her isolation. She moved through the gallery, her fingers brushing over the edges of her artwork, grounding herself in the tangible, the familiar. Each piece told a story she had lived, a story of persistence, passion, and personal triumph, yet the unease would not subside. She paused in front of her favorite painting, a vibrant landscape she had worked on for months, and drew a deep, steadying breath, reminding herself that the value of her work was not dependent on external validation. Outside, a cab rolled past, honking briefly before continuing down the street, and she realized she could no longer ignore the need to confront the uncertainty directly. By the time she stepped out into the open air again, the sun was low, casting long shadows along the pavement, and she made a decision. She would speak to Ethan, address her doubts, demand transparency, and reclaim the clarity she had felt in the quiet moments of trust. The walk to his office felt simultaneously long and determined, each footfall echoing in rhythm with her resolve. She arrived at the building, the familiar revolving doors now a threshold of confrontation rather than routine entry. As she reached the elevator, her hand paused over the button, and she allowed herself a moment to center her thoughts, to steady her breathing, to prepare for a conversation that could either fracture the bond forming between them or strengthen it into something resilient and authentic. When the doors opened on Ethan's floor, she stepped forward with a quiet determination, the city lights glinting behind her, ready to face the conversation she had delayed, ready to transform doubt into dialogue, suspicion into understanding, and tension into the possibility of reaffirmed trust. The gallery doors opened to reveal a transformed space, softly lit with warm overhead lights that highlighted the vibrant colors of Sophie Taylor's artwork. Ethan Cole stood at the far end, his dark eyes scanning the room with a careful intensity, a slight, genuine smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he observed the curated pieces. Sophie stepped in, her breath catching for a moment, taking in the familiar walls now alive with the energy of a special exhibit she had never dared to imagine in her modest gallery. Each canvas, each brushstroke, seemed to tell her story, a story of perseverance, creativity, and the small victories that had carried her this far. Ethan approached, his footsteps quiet on the polished wooden floors, and handed her a sleek envelope, its contents neatly tucked inside, waiting to be revealed. Sophie opened it carefully, finding a letter of acknowledgement, an invitation to showcase her work at a prominent downtown exhibit, and a note from Ethan. I wanted you to see what the world can offer when your talent and integrity are recognized. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, her heart lifting at the unexpected gesture. Ethan gestured toward the center of the gallery, where a single painting had been framed on an easel, illuminated more brightly than the others, the edges, adorned with soft, subtle lighting that drew the eye. This is yours, he said simply, his tone calm, yet imbued with a depth of emotion that was rare in his usual measured speech. Sophie walked forward, touching the frame lightly, feeling the texture of the paint and the careful detail that had been preserved. Her gaze met Ethan's, and in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. This was not about obligation, not about contract or arrangement, but about recognition, trust, and respect for the person she was, independent of circumstance. The room was still except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant murmur of the city outside, yet the space between them seemed charged with an unspoken affirmation. Sophie felt a swell of emotion she could not name, the culmination of weeks of tension, discovery, and shared effort crystallizing in the simple act of acknowledgement and support. Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, not in demand or expectation, but in gentle affirmation, grounding the moment in connection rather than formality. He spoke then, quietly. I hope this shows you what I see in your work, in your character, in your approach to everything you touch. Sophie nodded, a soft smile spreading across her face, the gravity of the gesture filling her chest with warmth. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel truly seen, not as a participant in an arrangement, but as an individual whose talent, persistence, and honesty had made an impact on someone who had initially seemed so distant and untouchable. And in the glow of the gallery lights, surrounded by her creations, Sophie realized that the bridge between their worlds had not only been crossed but strengthened, and that the bond forming between them was rooted not in circumstance but in authenticity, acknowledgement, and the careful, deliberate gestures that had quietly transformed their connection into something real and enduring. The evening of the private exhibition arrived with a quiet elegance, the soft lighting accentuating each canvas in a way that made the colors glow and the textures come alive under the gaze of the few invited guests. Sophie Taylor walked through the gallery, her heart thumping gently, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floors, each step echoing in the space that now felt like an extension of herself rather than a separate world she had entered out of necessity. Ethan Cole followed a few paces behind, his presence steady, his dark eyes attentive, scanning the room occasionally before settling on Sophie, a subtle smile lifting the corners of his mouth as he watched her interact with the guests. The crowd, small and respectful, gave space for the exhibit to breathe, yet their quiet admiration created a gentle tension that made Sophie's pulse quicken. Ethan stepped forward, handing her a small, elegantly wrapped box, and her fingers trembled slightly as she untied the delicate ribbon, revealing a sleek, silver ring nestled within its velvet interior. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, and Ethan spoke softly, his tone carrying the weight of sincerity and anticipation. "Sophie, this is not just about the exhibition, or the gallery, or even the arrangement we agreed upon. It is about what I have come to realize over these weeks, the trust, the understanding, and the way you have shown your character through every challenge and every moment of vulnerability. I want to continue this journey with you, freely and without obligation, with the hope that we can build something real together." Sophie felt her chest tighten, a swell of emotion rising as she processed the words, the gesture, and the symbolism of the ring in her hand. Her lips parted,